It was my first week at university, and I hadn't made any friends yet. The campus was huge, and I'd spend most of my time either in my dorm or quietly wandering around. Everything felt unfamiliar and intimidating, and a strange loneliness clung to me wherever I went. So when I ran into Chuck, I couldn't believe my luck. Chuck had been this giant presence back in high school, literally. At 7 feet 2 inches, he towered over everyone, which often made him a target for all sorts of jokes and rude comments. I remember feeling sorry for him. People saw his height before they saw his personality, and that kept most people at a distance. We'd been friends, though, mostly because I never let his height bother me. In a strange way, maybe I felt that he was as much an outsider as I was. We chatted, exchanging awkward laughs about being at the same university. He seemed thrilled to see me, his face lighting up like he'd finally found something familiar in a sea of strangers. Before we parted ways, I gave him my number and invited him to come by my dorm sometime. It felt good to reconnect, to have someone to talk to again. About a week later, he called me, asking if I wanted to catch up. I didn't even hesitate. Finally, someone I knew, someone I could talk to without feeling like an outsider. We agreed he'd come by that afternoon. I found myself nervously cleaning my tiny dorm room, hoping everything looked nice. When he arrived, Chuck was as massive as I remembered, his shoulders nearly filling the doorway as he ducked to step inside. We settled on my tiny couch, chatting about high school drama and laughing over silly memories. His laugh was just as loud and awkward as I remembered, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of something intense that I hadn't noticed before. He kept glancing around, his gaze lingering on things like my desk and the books on my shelves. But I shrugged it off. He was probably just curious. At some point, Chuck picked up my sketchbook. I didn't mind. Most people loved to flip through my sketches, mostly rough doodles of people I'd seen around campus or characters from my favorite stories. But Chuck turned the pages slowly, like he was studying each one carefully. Finally, he stopped, picking up a pencil and drawing on an empty page. I watched, at first amused, as he drew a rough stick figure, but then his hand moved more carefully, separating the limbs from the torso and adding little droplets of blood around the severed parts. My stomach twisted as I stared at the disturbing image.
What are you drawing?
I asked, feeling the tension in my own voice. He turned to look at me, his expression serious and intense.
This is what you did to me,
he said quietly.
In high school. I really liked you, you know. And you just ignored me.
His words sent a red alert immediately to my soul. I'd always thought of him as a friend, a buddy. The idea that he had felt anything deeper had never even crossed my mind.
I'm sorry, Chuck.
I stammered, trying to keep my voice calm.
I didn't realize you...
He gave a strange smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Then, without a word, he got up and walked into my tiny kitchen. I sat there, stunned, watching him as he opened drawers, rifling through them until he found my butcher knife. He stood in the kitchen doorway, gripping the knife loosely in one hand, his eyes fixed on me. The look on his face was cold, his lips contorted into a smile that sent me into a whirlwind of internal panic.
You know,
he said softly,
you're not safe here. You think that just because you lock your door at night, nothing can get you. But you're wrong.
My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't happening, not Chuck. I felt anger bubbling up inside me, washing away the initial shock. I stood up, trying to keep my voice steady even though my hands were trembling.
You need to put that down and just leave, Chuck.
For a moment, he just stared at me, the knife glinting in his hand, and I wasn't sure what he would do. The tension in the room felt like it would crush me. But then, slowly, he placed the knife on the counter and turned away. Without another word, he walked out the door, leaving me alone in the silence. The adrenaline wore off quickly, and I slumped onto the couch, feeling the weight of what had just happened pressing down on me. My hands shook as I picked up my phone, debating whether to call someone. Campus security, a friend, anyone. I couldn't believe that I had just faced down someone who could have hurt me, someone I thought was a friend. Chuck's words echoed in my head, and I shuddered, thinking about that eerie smile and the knife in his hand. The next day, I went to campus security and told them what happened. They took notes and promised to initiate an investigation. They couldn't get an arrest without evidence. After all, he hadn't hurt me, just scared me. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd seen a side of Chuck I was never meant to see. A few weeks passed, and the memory faded just a little. I tried to move on, focus on my classes, make new friends, and fill the gaps in my life that Chuck's visit had left. But every so often I'd catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. A tall shadow in the distance, or a figure that looked too much like Chuck walking down the hallway, and my heart would race all over again. I'd lock my door at night, double-checking every lock and latch, reassuring myself that I was safe. But the truth was, Chuck had left me with a sense of dread that I couldn't shake. He was out there somewhere, lurking on campus, and I couldn't escape the feeling that he was still watching, waiting, maybe even hoping for another chance to get close. In a way, Chuck had succeeded. He'd taken that sense of safety and security from me, leaving me with a fear that clung to me like a stench. I had learned a hard lesson that day. Sometimes monsters aren't just in stories. Sometimes they're old friends you thought you knew, hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to show you who they really are. I'd been working at the company for about 6 months when I met Claire. We got along well from the start. Claire worked in accounting, and I was in marketing, so our paths didn't cross much at first. But we'd chat by the coffee machine or exchange emails when one of us needed something for work. She was funny and always knew the latest office gossip, which made her interesting to talk to. She seemed to know a lot about me, too, which I thought was just her being friendly. Then I met Jessica, who worked in HR. We clicked instantly. She had this warm smile that made you feel like she'd known you forever. After a few weeks of friendly lunches and long conversations, we started dating. We were careful about it, keeping things low-key. The last thing we needed was office drama. Jessica was a bit wary of Claire from the start, though. She said Claire seemed too interested in my life. I brushed it off. Claire was just friendly, right? But things changed quickly. It started small. Claire was a bit colder, barely smiling when we passed each other at work. During coffee breaks, she'd sit far from me, scrolling on her phone. One day, she stopped by my desk and made an offhand comment about Jessica. She said something like,
I hope she treats you right.
but the way she said it made me uncomfortable. When I asked if something was bothering her, she shrugged and gave a tight smile.
I'm fine, Liam, really.
Soon after, Jessica's stuff started going missing. It was weird at first. Files she'd organized would disappear, and sometimes she'd find strange, cryptic notes left in her workspace. Messages like, "You're not as smart as you think," or "He's better off without you." Jessica was sure someone was messing with her. She thought it was Claire, but I didn't believe her. Why would Claire do that? I asked. But Jessica couldn't shake her suspicions. Things got worse. One night, Jessica called me late, her voice shaky. She'd been out on her balcony and thought she saw someone watching her from the street. It was just a shadow, maybe, but it freaked her out.
Liam, I know it's her,
she said, but I still didn't want to believe it. Claire was a little intense, sure, but she wouldn't stalk someone. Then came the company retreat. We were heading to a secluded cabin in the woods for team building. Jessica and I agreed to avoid any drama with Claire, who'd also be there. But on the first night, Jessica and I went for a walk after dinner. Claire showed up out of nowhere, giving me this odd, knowing look, and asked if she could join us. Jessica tried to stay calm, but I could tell she was tense. I didn't want to make a scene, so I let Claire tag along. That night, I woke up to an empty bed. Jessica was gone. I panicked and checked the cabin, finding the front door open. Running outside, I saw Jessica stumbling through the trees, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. She was mumbling about hearing her name whispered outside her window, feeling as though someone was calling her into the woods. I wrapped my arms around her, trying to calm her down, but she was convinced it was Claire. The next day, Jessica was distant, and Claire acted like nothing had happened. She was all smiles, chatting with coworkers as if the night before hadn't happened. But Jessica's anxiety kept growing, and she begged me to confront Claire. She said she couldn't take the constant feeling that Claire was lurking around every corner, watching her, waiting. That evening, we were all sitting around a bonfire, and Jessica finally confronted Claire. She told her to back off, to leave us alone. Claire looked stunned at first, then her expression darkened. She said something that sent chills through me.
I was just trying to protect him.
She said, glancing at me.
People like you don't really care about him. You'll just hurt him like everyone else.
The group around the fire went quiet. The tension was thick as Claire and Jessica stared each other down. I felt trapped, stuck between them. Then Claire lunged at Jessica, pushing her back. I jumped up, but before I could reach them, David, a coworker who'd been sitting near the fire, tried to pull Claire away. In the chaos, Claire pulled something out of her coat pocket, a knife. The gleam of the blade caught the firelight. There was a gasp, and in an instant David stepped forward to shield Jessica. Claire swung her hand, and I'll never forget the horror of that moment. The knife caught David in a quick, terrifying blur, and suddenly there was blood. People screamed, and some tried to pull Claire back, but she just stood there, her face blank and calm, the knife hanging in her hand. She looked at me, as if she had nothing to regret, saying softly,
I did what I had to.
David was rushed to the hospital, but he didn't make it. I was left in shock, my mind reeling, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. I couldn't believe that Claire, the same person I'd shared so many casual coffee breaks with, had done something so horrifying. I felt an overwhelming guilt, wondering if I could have stopped it if I'd only seen the signs. After that night, I couldn't look at the office the same way. Claire was arrested, and they said she'd probably never see the outside of a cell again. Jessica left the company soon after, unable to face the haunting memories of that night. I stayed, but every day felt colder, emptier. Months passed, but the memory of Claire and that night around the bonfire never faded. I couldn't shake the feeling that somehow I'd missed something crucial, some warning sign that could have stopped everything. And every time I thought of David, I felt the weight of that guilt settling over me all over again. Claire had been hiding something dark beneath that friendly exterior, and I'd been blind to it. In the end, it cost someone their life. Now every time I make a new friend, there's a part of me that wonders in the back of my mind if I truly know them, or if I'm just waiting to discover another dark secret.